Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone who's here live. So today I want to talk about the Sabbath, right? The revelation of Sabbath, what it actually means, how to engage it, the benefits, right? We're going to talk about that. Before I get started, my book, Fullness, Guide to Sonship and Mysticism, is out. This is a textbook, right? Meaning that whatever area of your kingdom walk, your kingdom experience that you're on, there's a section in this book that'll help you really walk that out. It gives you the how to, the what to's, the who's, the what's, all of that, right? It answers all the questions you really need to not only get started, but to stay grounded and build a lifestyle around your sonship, to live out a spirituality that actually produces results, something that works, something with real experiences. As it says at the bottom, it's available in paperback, ebook, audiobook, and you can order it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and you get the ebook specifically off of my website, caveofmystery.org. Now, enough of that. Let's talk about today's topic. As usual, those of you who are here live, leave comments and questions down below, and if they match with what I'm talking about today, I'll address those as I make time for it throughout, but definitely at the end. Now, the Sabbath is typically presented as the day of rest, meaning that, well, the way most people take it is that there's one day out of the week that you're supposed to take out to rest and to recharge. And this isn't necessarily wrong, right? And it comes from the paradigm given in Genesis when we talk about the days of creations. Believe that it took the God of the Old Testament about a week. It describes the days of creation as a 7-day process, the seventh of which being the day in which God rested after the creation. So kind of to mirror that, humanity also takes out one day in order to rest. And the Hebrews were very dogmatic about it. In fact, during the time of Yeshua actually walking the earth, he got in trouble for healing on the Sabbath and feeding people on the Sabbath because he was not supposed to be working. And his approach to that was saying, yeah, some things you need to be able to do even on the Sabbath. I'm summarizing that by a lot because there's even a lot of deeper stuff in his response to his critics at that time. And I'd say part of that was because they lost sight of the reason why to even participate in the Sabbath. In the same vein, they're walking around looking for people to persecute on the Sabbath. That sounds like a lot more harder work than it is to feed people or help them or heal them, right? So it even gets people on a similar vein, right? A lot of Christians, a lot of people, when they actually start to try to learn more, they actually pursue truth, they actually start to pursue knowledge, they'll start to embrace the Hebraic. And I have no problems with the Hebraic. I embrace the Hebraic myself. I'm just not a slave to the Hebraic. But one of the things that they'll start to do is they'll notice, well, most churches have their services on Sunday. But if we were to go by more of a Hebraic presentation of time, well, the Sabbath would not actually be Sunday, it would be Saturday. Actually, the way the days line up, it would be sunset Friday to sunset Saturday. The days are a little offset because Hebrews measured the beginning of a day at sunset. So about 6 p.m. to 6 p.m. is a day in the Hebrew tradition. So Friday night or Friday evening all the way to Saturday evening would be considered the Sabbath. But even that isn't that important, right? Because it's not really about a day of worship. That's not what the Sabbath was about. In fact, at the time when they were dealing with the Sabbaths, they weren't dealing with them under the same paradigm as we have now. When we think Sabbath, you think day of worship. That's not it. They weren't thinking about when to host their fellowship or when to have their worship service. That wasn't the archetype that they were dealing with. The day of rest or the Sabbath, depending on the era, was an instruction to rest. It was a demand from the divine to take time out and not do any work. Now, in a capitalist society as we have it today, in the convenient society we're used to, taking one day off just to rest is a sacrifice. In fact, our world functions on the idea of you working and not resting until you work yourself to death. So our society, what we're used to, goes directly in contrast with the idea of taking a break. So let's talk about just the natural aspect of it, right? If you're working 24/7, you're going to break down. You're going to have a fall. Our bodies are not designed to go forever without a break. You need a break. So in our modern culture, we don't get enough sleep. We don't get enough rest. We don't get enough recreation, which means we are perpetually heading towards a grave, just because we're depriving ourselves of the simple things that we need, which is just enough rest. I'm not even talking about the food, the quality of food. I'm not talking about the type of work that we do, but there comes a moment where you need rest. Now, when I say rest, a lot of people think of sleep, and sleep and rest are not the same thing. In fact, it's possible to go to sleep, wake up, and you're still tired. Anyone else ever experienced that, right? You go to sleep, you get up, and you still tired, right? On average, they say we need about 8 hours of sleep in order to get a full rest. Most of us don't experience anything close to 8 hours. In fact, when I was in the workforce in the way that I was, we would actually brag about how little sleep we needed to function, as if that's a good thing, right? The supernatural gives me an extra push, but even that's not a good thing. The body on its own needs it needs a break, right? Everything else needs a break, right? You don't run your car 24/7. You give your car time to sit. You don't run computers 24/7. It takes a time. There comes a moment where even a computer needs to power down and be off for a moment before you start it back up. Rest is encoded into our very being. We need it, right? Just on a health aspect, we need rest, whether that's physical or mental. You need rest, right? So the idea of the Sabbath in one presentation of it is making sure that you take one day out to relax. No mental exertion, no physical exertion, a time where you can actually be. Look, people like myself who enjoy steak, right? Well, if you don't want a plate full of what looks like blood, it's not blood, right? After you cook it, you sit it there so that it can rest, so that it can relax for a moment. It lets go of the tension. You need that as a living being more than the steak needs it now that it's dead. A moment to just rest. And it's that lack of rest that leads to people having so many mental issues. This is why depression is high. This is why anxiety is high. It's because we're intentionally kept in a phase where rest is our enemy, because most of us are in survival mode. And if you stop for a moment in survival, that's the end of the game you play. That's just how that works. In fact, politicians just a few days ago were talking about how the reason they don't want to raise the minimum wage is because that would get people out of survival mode, and people aren't necessarily, they say some jobs shouldn't pay a living. We don't want everyone out of that mentality. We need more people trying to survive than we have people living lavishly. Yeah, they said the quiet part out loud. That's by John D. Rockefeller's design. The same guy that we credit for putting the poison in the food, feeding the pharmaceutical industries, and poisoning every aspect of our life is the one who implemented the structure we're used to now. He said, I don't want a nation of thinkers. I want a nation of workers. Keep them busy. Because if you're busy and if you're in survival mode, you never have time to actually take care of yourself or your surroundings, because everything that you gain, every inch earned, is about not going under. Life is like playing Squid Game, but that's just one aspect of it, right? So at the very least, you need mental rest and you need physical rest. When's the last time you've rested? You need that. See, because people think that if you're not working a physical job, you don't need rest. No, mental work, right? Your mind being in a state where you're constantly being pulled on, constantly solving problems. Problem solving is good, but you need a break. It's for this reason that monks, right? They had a trinity that they would live by: work, rest, and play. That they saw recreation as important. You need a time in which your mind is on something that you actually enjoy doing. But here's the thing: play can also be a form of work. In that, what if the thing that you like do does take mental exertion? What if the thing that you like doing does take physical exertion? This is why rest is separate. They're super similar because they feed a different part of us, and they're equally. When's the last time you and an adult actually had fun? You actually said you enjoyed that whole day. You had fun for a whole day. Fewer and farther between than when you were a kid. No wonder we're destroyed, right? Because as kids, play and rest was mandatory above everything else. You go play outside, you go have your nap, right? What made you think we grew out of that? No, society made us stop doing that, but the need for that never changed. You need naps just as much now as an adult as you needed them when you were in kindergarten. You need to go play just as much now as an adult as you did when you were a kid. You need that still. You need play, you need rest, and you need work. You need to get some things done. When's the last time you played? When's the last time you rested? Those are some things to evaluate. So now that's just the natural aspect of Sabbath. Now for the fun part, right? Sabbath originally didn't have much to do with rest in the way that we receive it, right? Remember, the paradigm of the Sabbath, at least from a Hebraic or Judeo-Christian standpoint, comes from the days of creation. On the first day, God created this, and on the second, that, and then you get to the end. God was finished, and he rested. That's the paradigm in which we get the Sabbath, right? What if I told you that Genesis 1 and that whole creation narrative is not a narrative? It's a poem. It's a poem, right? They're not actually telling you how creation came about one to one. They're not giving you a history. They're telling you that things were created, but that's not really the point of the author. That's not the literary devices that are being used. No, they're actually trying to show you your placement in creation is what you get out of that part of Genesis. So let me explain. The author of that portion of Genesis was using the verbiage of their day to describe a process that everyone in their day could also recognize. That's how you use metaphors, right? If I say it's cold as hell, well, people who experience hell know that hell is cold, right? So therefore, you have to reference something when making a metaphor that people actually recognize. When, I live in Texas, it's hot out here. There comes a point, one of us might say, hey, it's so hot out here, I feel like brisket, right? That's something we get in Texas because we barbecue a lot. We get it. That's a barbecue reference. We feel like the meat on the inside of the pit. Well, that's no different than with Genesis 1. They're using the verbiage of their day to describe something to the people. So each of the days of creation actually line up perfectly with the days of dedication when building a temple. And there's actually somewhat of a mistranslation when going into it. He says, let us make man in our image. Hold up for a moment. It would actually be, let us make man as our image. Well, what does image mean? Everywhere else in the Bible, image means idol. It means idol. Well, why would God be making an idol of himself or their selves? Because it is a plurality in Genesis, but why are they making an idol? Oh, It's because they're creating a temple. Well, what part does an idol have in a temple? It was on the seventh day that the people of that day, right? People who are constructing a temple, the last thing to go into a temple was the god. So that's the day in which they would fashion their idol, humanity fashioned out of clay, right? And they would wheel it in, they would bring it into the innermost part of the temple, and they would put the idol into the temple. The God is now resting in its creation, it's now resting in its temple. So the point that you're supposed to get out of the early part of Genesis isn't that God in his infinite power got tired. No. No. What you're supposed to get out of the early part of Genesis is that you are the idol of the divine. In fact, you are the thing that creation looks at when it wants to experience God. That's what you're supposed to get out of that, right? So it's not about getting tired. It's about your placement, because you are the idol of the divine in the temple that we call creation. So just as every other part of the temple gets there before the idol does, so did every other part of creation get here before us. Yet we're the thing that has the dominion. That's the point, is that you have dominion. It's giving you a picture of the truth about yourself, that you were fashioned to be the representative. Well, what's the idol? Remember, the idol is to the natural world what the God is to the spirit world. You are the physical emanation of divine realities. That's how this is supposed to play out. So what then would be the purpose of a weekly Sabbath, of a regular Sabbath? A day of remembrance. A day to remember when you rested. But I'm speaking of this from an eternal standpoint. Rest in this sense, representing your descent into humanity, into temporal form. Who were you in eternity is who you should be trying to connect with on the Sabbath, not just relaxing. As much as I said earlier, relaxing and playing and all that stuff is necessary for your health. It's beneficial, but it's deeper than that, right? So imagine if we actually practice the Sabbath thing, right? What if instead of taking one day out to worship, one day out to praise, one day out to have this grand service that drains everybody that's involved, right? What if instead of doing that, you took a day out and said, I just want to focus on connecting to who I am in eternity? What aspect of divinity was I meant to embody? See, this is how Yeshua was able to, in the midst of being under the law, not break the law when he was healing on the Sabbath, feeding people on the Sabbath, because he never denied the divinity that he was in. He had fulfilled it. In order to fulfill the Sabbath is to remember who you are in eternity, to tap into the divine record of your pre-existence. So him healing and him feeding was a byproduct of his divinity. He remembered. This is why even when participating in the Passover, he says, this ye do in remembrance of me. Most of his mission is about us waking up, us remembering that we are of a similar archetype and similar design to him. He was our evangelist, coming to share to us about a message of a kingdom, divine realities, the truth about ourselves. I often call Yeshua humanity inside out. We're not any different than him. He was trying to prove a point to us about who we were. He wasn't actually here to gain any worshipers. So what's the Sabbath all about? Oh, it's the day of remembrance, remembering who you are in the heavens, who you were, or who you are in eternity, building connection, bridging the gap. As my Kemites would say, Smai Tawi, the process of bridging the gap between the higher and lower. That's what the Sabbath is all about. So imagine if we as a culture, let's pretend that the last 2,000 years didn't happen. How different would the future be if instead of weekly church service, everyone separated for a day, went in private and sought themselves, went in and sought the truth about who they were or who they are in eternity, who they were before they touched temporality. I actually think humanity as we know it would be completely different. And that's just one day a week reflecting on who you are. You could call it the day of reflection. So, day of rest, right? Why is it called day of rest? Because they were dealing with a metaphor. So, it was something they understood that eventually they lost sight of because they got stuck in the dogma. Now you have people who don't know who they are, aren't trying to find out who they are, participating in a ritual. Maybe that's why, even in the Old Testament, Yahweh got upset with them and said, your Sabbaths are an abomination to me. Going through the right motions for the wrong reasons. That's difficult. So this is what Sabbath is all about. It's not about being dogmatic about which day of the week you're supposed to rest on, which day of the week you're supposed to hold your church service. It ain't got nothing to do with that. No. It's less about which day and more about that you do it. That you remember is more important than when you remember. Remember what? Remember who you are. Hey, watch Lion King again. Remember who you are. Tap into that record, that cosmic record, that divine record that actually reveals the heavenly portion of yourself. That's what this is all about. Oh, I like this. Someone said if you take a day off and you only worry about something, you have no rest. There you go. A lot of times, even just going back to the natural example of the necessity of rest, a lot of time when you have off time, all you do is sit and think about all the stuff you got to do when you get off your break. So your break feel like a waste of time, which just adds more anxiety to it. That's by design. Thank Rockefeller for that. All right. And yes, right? Even though I shared a deeper truth, the lower truth still matters. So yes, you need your rest, you need your play. But greater than those, you need to remember who you are. That's the actual importance of the Sabbath. So the Sabbath is what gives you your dominion. People ask me, how do I know what I'm meant to rule over? Oh, you're supposed to actually be taking a day out to reflect and unravel that. How do I know what I rule over? How do I know I'm seated in heavenly places? What portion of the heavens do I rule? Oh, yeah, you need to take time out and uncover that, unravel that. You need to seek that out. What was I put on the earth to do? Yeah, that's what the Sabbath's for. A day of dominion, a day of reflection, a day of remembrance. So let's see. We're getting ready to wrap up because I shared what I got to share for today. But I'm going to give y'all a chance to ask some questions as it relates to this. In the meantime, I want to do my announcement break. So I have 2 courses coming up this fall, a healer's course and a spiritual warfare course. Spiritual warfare course is free and it's 7 weeks. Healer's course is 8 weeks. It's not free. Information for both is on my website, caveofmystery.org. Those courses are for people who are tired of being powerless, tired of being vulnerable, tired of being helpless in situations that require either. You tired of people dying around you, getting sick? Maybe you tired of being sick, right? I myself haven't been sick in a decade. I've learned how to not do that. That's something I share with y'all in the class, right? So, like I said, you want to learn how to heal yourself, heal other people, how how to not be sick again, how to just live in health, the science of health. I was inspired by John G. Lake, who prayed and asked to learn the science of healing. And in a similar vein, I understand it as a science too. Therefore, I teach it as a science, something that can be replicated. I grew up Baptist. I grew up where you pray for healing and either it worked or it don't, and it usually didn't. And I didn't like that. I didn't like the idea of God moving in mysterious ways when my family members were dying, my loved ones passing away. I didn't like that. And I didn't actually think it was God's responsibility. So I went to learn. I got inspired by people, John G. Lake, Catherine Kuhlman, who just was able to do that. So I'm like, okay, if they can do it, so can I. That's what a testimony is for. So if you want to learn that science, sign up for my healer's course. When it comes to spiritual warfare, hey, I'll tell y'all this, just as a precursor. One of the reasons y'all struggle in areas of spiritual warfare and even deliverance is that y'all try too hard to be Judah, and most of you are not. There's many methods of warfare. There's areas of offense, areas of defense, and Christianity, for the most part, teaches neither. So I'm going to share both because I live a demon-free life. I don't go through self-deliverance these days. I went through that years ago. I live a pure life now. I don't experience attack after attack after attack after attack. If it's not one thing, it's another. Hey, if you tired of living that way, if that's you, you live in that way, or you actually want to be able to help when situations arise, either of those courses. Remember, the spiritual warfare course is free and it's on my website, caveofmystery.org. So let's see. Both of those should have given y'all a chance to ask some questions. And also Patreon. Again, all information's on the website, caveofmystery.org. So let's see. What are keys or a key to enter into rest? Powerful, right? It comes down to the exertion of your life. Even when I was working a regular job, I learned how to live rested. And the simple way I could say this is to recognize and pay attention to your energy throughout the day, whether that be physical or mental. Pay attention to your exertion. So I had to train myself in sensitivity, checking on my levels every day. How do I feel right now? I'm feeling drained. Why am I feeling drained? Okay, what's draining me? And then I would check that, right? I'm an introvert, which means I play by different rules. As much as I love people, I can't deal with social interactions for too long. It'll drain me. All my energy will go. So I can't do certain things for too long. That's not nothing wrong. That's just how I'm wired, right? And it's not even about being social or antisocial. No, introversion or extroversion, that's a separate topic altogether. That has more to do about how energy flows through you when dealing with social interactions. But just in that vein, right? I had to recognize what conversations are draining me, what interactions are draining me. I'm like, okay, because I have to be around people. Me reclusing and never being around anybody, that's not really an option. I have too much work to do. So I started to recognize that. I'm like, some conversations I can only entertain for a certain amount of time. Some people I can only be around for a certain amount of time. Not because what's on them is going to get on me. No, I'm beyond that. It's more about the energetic demand that they have on me. I'm like, no, you want a bit too much for me. I can't do it. Right? So paying attention to my energy throughout the day on an emotional level, on a mental level, and on a physical level, checking my energy. So learning how to live a rested life meant that by default, I don't actually have to sleep as long because my body is getting its rest. You think about someone like elderly people, right? In the case where they're retired, they just at the house, they don't work no more. They go to sleep at 7:30. They up at 11 o'clock, they good for the rest of the day because they didn't have any exertion, mental or physical, for most of the day. Therefore, they didn't need that long of a recharge time. So you'll naturally notice the more rested you live, the less sleep you need. So that's my simple answer I can give for entering into rest, is to recognize your energy. What is draining you the most? What are you giving away energy to? The altars of your life. What are you giving yourself to? I like that. God didn't command worship, he commanded dominion. There you go. Is your body's rest attached to your soul being at ease? Half, right? One part metaphysical, one part physical. Does mindless meditation count as rest? It can help you. It's more about, and it comes with practice, the state that you can enter in through meditation where your body fully relaxes. It's less about entering that state more often and learning how to live in that state, right? The state that you enter into in prayer, where all of your issues fade away, is the place that you're actually allowed to live from. But the number one reason, right, if we're talking about the reason most people aren't at rest, is because most people have no idea why they're here. They don't know who they are. And, or let's just say, or they know what they're supposed to be doing and they're not doing it. Your lifeline is your identity. So not doing what's in your eternal record is the greatest way to stress you out, whether you know what it is or not. You know how many people are depressed because they know exactly what they're supposed to be doing and can't do it, or have made a decision to not do it? Amazing singers that don't sing. Right. It's not a lack of medication, it's a lack of destiny. And that's really what living by the Spirit is all about. It's letting the spiritual reality of yourself express itself through your physical body. And that's really what worship is. It's the expression of the divine through you. It's not really supposed to be this idea of we come here, we bow down, and we give up our identity for someone else's. No. It's the reason Yeshua didn't teach that stuff. It's more about you letting the Spirit flow through you, letting yourself be spirit, letting yourself be eternal, and letting that eternity express itself in temporality. All right, y'all. So that's pretty much it for today. I didn't plan on coming on long. I've learned that if I don't say that early, I actually get to finish a whole lot quicker on these. You know, I'm a recovering Baptist. You know, we say I won't be before you long and then take an hour. But this was cool. Again, if you want to hear any more of my sessions that aren't on YouTube, I have a full library available on Patreon. And again, I got courses coming up. All information related to me is on my website, caveofmystery.org. You can find everything there. My books, my courses, my classes, my archive, my shop, everything. So with that being said, I love y'all. Y'all be blessed. Until next time. Later.